So yeah, this game has one of the best intro sequences I've seen in any video game, and even if you decide not to get the game, you should still go look up just the intro sequence to see it. But I digress. For a little bit of background, Prey was a franchise that started way back in 2006. It was incredibly ambitious for its time and quickly developed a cult following. Even for my part, while I didn't ever actually own the game and didn't play it for too much time, I did enjoy the time I had with it quite a lot. So a few years later, a sequel was announced. The demos and trailers they showed for it looked amazing, but much to the dismay of fans, the project was cancelled. Now, a lot of sources say the game was pretty much in a finished state before it was cancelled, with some sources saying the cancellation was due to some bullshit corporate reasons. And since all the work done on the previous game was lost along with the company developing it, in order for Bethesda to continue the franchise, they'd need to hand it off to a developer to create a brand new game from scratch. And so it was given to Arkane Studios, the people behind Dishonored, and they made the game we have now. And Arkane Studios had some pretty big shoes to fill after what we saw of Prey 2, a task made even more difficult by Bethesda's encouragement not to have them follow the original Prey franchise, instead encouraging them to build an entirely new universe from the ground up. And while this is no doubt disappointing for fans of the franchise, does it really make Prey a bad game? The first question I had going into this game was, is this new universe going to be cool? And as a matter of fact, it is really cool. This alternate universe where Kennedy survived his assassination, poured money into the space program, and cooperated with the Soviets during the Cold War, presenting a very cool and compelling vision of the future with really badass technologies like the Looking Glass that shows entire simulated worlds on the other side of a pane of glass, and neuromods that alter your brain so that you learn new skills automatically, which is even tied into the gameplay to serve as a rewarding, well done skill and rank up system, where you have this sort of balance between human and alien abilities, where if you take up too many alien abilities it could affect your game's ending and even affect how the turrets see your DNA signature, with the trade-off of allowing you access to these really powerful alien skills, even allowing you to take the alien's mimic power to turn into turrets and shit, serving as an excellent backdrop for a fantastic main story that has you interested the entire way through, and an ending that leaves you shocked once all the pieces are put together. And all that with a fantastically composed soundtrack, equal parts portraying the wonder of space, the horror of the alien threat, and the tragedy of the deaths of the Talos 1 crew. The last of which is really brought to life by Arkane's attention to detail, giving a name and story to every single human aboard Talos 1, a majority of them even being involved in a lot of the side quests. And on top of that, adding a little personal goal to find every single crew member aboard the ship. Which also, speaking of side quests, sometimes will have an effect on your ending as well. The side quests, of which there is no shortage of in Prey, have an incredibly rewarding impact on your experience, unlocking previously unexplored areas, and even, like I said, sometimes affecting the ending of your game. And a lot of the stories of the crew are often done with this environmental storytelling style that Arkane Studios is so good at, where the details and objects in the environment tell a story in and of itself. In fact, this game draws inspiration from Dishonored in a lot of ways, mainly in the design of the environments, taking the non-linear gameplay design of Dishonored and expanding upon it, where every little room, path, and hallway is interconnected, with hundreds of different ways to approach each objective, and this time even allowing you to return to previous zones from other missions, oftentimes even encouraging you to do so, seemingly taking hints from Dark Souls, surprisingly enough. There isn't a single room on the entire space station that's completely inaccessible, even allowing you to EVA on the station's exterior, with intuitive zero-G controls for both EVA and microgravity segments within the station. All that combined with the pacing and gameplay style of the Bioshock or System Shock games, from which Prey draws more inspiration from than actually the original Prey titles, is a match made in heaven. Arkane Studios absolutely nails this type of gameplay. The mimics are perhaps one of the best enemies I've seen in a lot of games, transforming themselves into everyday objects around the entire game, creating fear and tension surrounding coffee mugs and chairs, delivering a sensation throughout the entire experience that you're never safe and you're never alone, making you want to question and attack every single prop and item you find, kind of feeling like a story mode or campaign for Prop Hunt. The crafting system is very streamlined and rewarding, allowing you to break down items through the recycler, turning them into materials you can use to craft medkits, ammo, and even replacement weapons in case you accidentally recycled one earlier. And the interactable menus on computer screens and keypads is really well done. It really does a good job of immersing you in the experience, and it's a surprise this hasn't been done a lot before. And just like with Dishonored, while the graphics aren't anything amazing to speak of, the art team still shines when it comes to the artwork, like the paintings, drawings, and interface in the game. In fact, with this game being made in CryEngine, I expected more from the graphics, but it's still a pleasure to look at. Prey is one of those rare exceptions of a game where I have trouble putting together a huge list of things I have to complain about. Which isn't to say the game isn't without fault, just that a lot of the problems are kinda minor and nagging and not glaring and horrible. One example being the first person animations for some weapons feeling a little wonky, or a lot of the characters lip syncing being a bit off of what's actually being said, but there are still a few other problems that bother me a bit more in this game. For all the improvements they made over Dishonored's gameplay formula, Prey still manages to carry over some of the problems I had with it. One being an overabundance of text-based collectibles, with a huge reliance on pausing your gameplay experience to read something in order to understand the backstory of the game. Fortunately, however, this time around there are a few other sources to obtain that information, like the museum in the Talos lobby, reducing the negative impact this has on the game overall this time. It may not give you the full story, but if the text collectibles were bothering you like they were for me, you can safely ignore them and still understand what's going on. Also, the annoyingly tacked on bone charms from Dishonored make a return in the form of these chipsets. Tons of these little tiny pieces of equipment that give you unique, equally tiny benefits. I wish here they did the same thing I recommended they do for Dishonored, combining the effects of these chipsets into singular, less common pieces of loot, such as helmets, psychoscopes, and suits. Perhaps even giving each piece of gear unique visual appearances as well. We also have a couple problems from a technical standpoint as well. The biggest for me was a weird imbalance in some of the audio volumes, with some things such as character dialogue seeming to be unaffected no matter how much you messed with the volume sliders, or being super quiet because you had to crank down one of the volume sliders that another sound was attached to and was being too loud. But the thing is, if the game runs without being super loud for you on the default settings, you're probably going to be fine. But if you're like me and the default volume controls are insanely loud, it's going to turn into a huge annoyance when you're trying to turn the volume down in-game. And secondly, some of the controls in the inventory management and UI tend to be a little unresponsive. Thankfully, it only happens in menus where the game is paused, so it's not anything that's going to get you killed, but it is something that'll make you fidget and clench when you're trying to split a stack of items in your inventory and it just isn't working. And lastly, with the exception of the Mimic, a lot of the enemy designs seem a little uninspired and boring. And even in the case of the Mimic, it's only mechanically where it's really cool. For the most part, the enemies are just black tendrily masses. Some might be a bit more bulbous or a bit larger or a bit more humanoid, but they're all essentially black goopy tendrils that are trying to eat your face. I'd have understood if it was like one enemy, i.e. the Mimic, that was just a black tendrily monstrosity thing, but I'd have liked to see a bit more variety in some of the other enemy types. I only really have two ideas for this part, so this is going to be a short part this time. The first of which being, of course, New Game Plus. The game surprisingly doesn't have it, and oddly enough, I feel like it doesn't really take away from the experience not having it, but I think it would have made the experience better to have it, especially with how long it takes to acquire some of the items and powers. And next is the topic of multiplayer, for which I have a bit bigger ideas. Of course, if you know me, you'll know I'll always vouch for every game having co-op, so yes, of course this game should have co-op modes. Invite your friend to join you for the story mode, or perhaps just have some kind of survival mode against the Typhon with friends, or maybe even have both in there. But where I see the biggest potential, and I'm surprised hearing myself say this considering how much I dislike competitive modes most of the time, is that this game would have a really amazing competitive mode if they decided to make one. You could have different game modes and styles, like one where one team is mimics and the other are humans, kind of like a AAA version of Prop Hunt. Or kind of like a 4v1 game mode where one team is the humans and the other is the nightmare and you have to go up against a big ass enemy monster controlled by a player. I just don't think we see enough asymmetrical competitive modes in gaming these days. And Prey sets the stage for an amazing one, but it doesn't even try to do it. So all that being said, it's time we come to the final verdict for the game. And this one really came out of left field for me. I wasn't expecting too much from Prey, but I was pleasantly surprised by its fun, open-ended nature and its amazing story, causing it to come in at a 9 out of 10 for me. A lot of the die-hard fans of the original Prey franchise are upset by this game because it has nothing to do with the original Prey, and I totally understand those complaints. In fact, if I were given the choice of having this come out or the original Prey 2 that got cancelled, I would much rather have had Prey 2 come out, but it absolutely does not mean that this is a bad game at all. In fact, when taken for what it is, this is an amazing game. A work of art even. I just really wish they hadn't slapped the Prey name on it. It's definitely not doing the game any favors since all the Prey fans are just getting mad at the game because of it. So of course, given all the praise I'm showering this game with, you know I'm gonna give it my recommendation. But in this case, I will elaborate a little bit that the lasting enjoyment of game is oftentimes subjective. And while from a gameplay perspective, this game has a lot of things I love, and objectively I have to admit it's a fantastic game, there are a few subjective things like the art style and the designs that just aren't personally my cup of tea that's gonna take away some of the lasting enjoyment from this game for me. But I'm definitely glad I bought it and experienced it for myself. Now definitely recommend this to others to go out and get as well. Anyway, that's it for this video. Please share it around if you enjoyed it. That will really help this channel grow, even more than liking or subscribing would. Although to be honest, that would also be appreciated. I also run a Patreon page if you really like my channel, but I'd encourage you only to go donate there if you really just want to help the channel grow, since I'm not really in a position to reward people individually for donating. So I'll leave a link to that and a card on the video, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.
Good. Next.
A runaway train is bearing down on 5 people. You're standing on the platform next to an enormously fat man. Pushing him under the track would stop the train. Yep.
Almost done.
A runaway train is bearing down on 5 people tied to the track. You could stop the train by jumping onto the track, but you would die. Push the fat man!
You know what? I'd probably do the same thing.
I know, right?
Well done. Well done.